Anyway, I think we'll get started, folks. I first and right at the outset to acknowledge Sharon. She's the brains behind the operation. So, so the person behind the video camera, that was Sharon, making things happen and telling me what to say and all kinds of things. So it's good. So thank you, Sharon, for organizing and arranging things tonight. I thought we'd do a really quick introduction, both folks on the screen and people here. Just it's funny. When I was reading people's papers, I go back and see this is that person, which is kind of nice to be able to put a face now to the name. So maybe we just go quickly around the room here, and we'll do the same with folks on screen. By the way, I'm Wayne.
I'm Neva.
I'm Leah.
So just tell us what program you're in. So yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Neva, and I'm doing MSc Rural Planning and Development.
I'm Leah. I'm in my second year of the NPH program.
I'm Matt. I'm in a number of years into the MRP program. I've been doing part-time.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm in the Masters of Public Health program in my second year as well.
Madison, Masters of Public Health, second year.
I'm Megan. I'm in my first year of RPD.
And I'm Kelsey. I'm my first year.
So maybe if the folks on the screen want to speak, I don't know if you can see an order to how you're arranged there. We can. We'll just let you jump in.
I can start. I'm Selena, and I'm in my first year of RPD as well.
I'm Halima. I'm in my first year in RPD as well.
Was that Paula?
Halima.
Oh, Halima. Sorry.
Halima.
Yeah. Okay, now I see the face.
I'm Carissa. Oh, go ahead. We can't see each other. I'm Carissa. I'm just starting the M-Plan program.
And I'm Rhiannon, and I'm doing the M-Plan program by distance from New Zealand. So.
And I'm Paula. I'm in the second year MPH program.
I think we may have some other, a couple of people canceled the childcare and a sick child, and so we'll see, but we may have some other people join in as time goes by, which is great. Thank everyone for being here tonight, particularly those of you who are here in person and those of you online as well. It's interesting in putting together a distance course and make it interactive for people. And it's not just something which is on screen, but there are other transcripts. That's a value. And thank you for giving up your Wednesday evening to be here. So thank you for that. Our agenda for this evening is relatively limited, so we may or may not take a long time allocated. We have two more sessions that will come together later in the semester, and those sessions will be more substantive in the content. About the end of the semester, I'll call it a mini paper that you're preparing, and then also your active transportation plan. So I'll look forward to hearing you. You're having fun. There's 3 or 4 things that I would like to do. The first question is, how is the course going? And any questions with regard to the assignments that assignment 3. And also then a bit of a discussion around the first 2 assignments, the one that's been handed in and graded, and then the second one. So with that, maybe I'll just ask the general question to start with, and it's a chance to check in that normally we have in that first week or 2 of the face-to-face. We're now, I think, week 4. So just a general question, any issues, anything we can do better, any flags for anyone at all? So, and it's okay to not be positive about these things if you have any concerns. So. Yeah.
I think it's going well. I found it hard for the first assignment to put it into 1,000 words.
Okay.
Personally. But so like I could have kept talking about it, but I guess you have to be very specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, because it could have easily been much longer than that. But the word limit is there for a reason, and it's to make sure that you conciseness is one of them, but also what's it worth the first assignment? Is it 10 or 15%? 15%. So I don't want people putting 40% effort into something that's worth 15%. So, but that's I would probably have the very same difficulty myself.
I'm
Yeah.
really liking the videos. They do make it feel much more interactive than some other online courses that I've taken where you're just getting hundreds and hundreds of pages to read instead of something to go along with the written content. It's a
Thank
nice
you for that.
compliment.
Yeah, it was actually kind of fun pulling them together. So hopefully that's evident to folks. Chuck Gardner is a great guy, as is George Gibbon, who you've seen lots of both of those people, and you'll see more of them as the semester goes along. I should confirm that folks on the screen you can hear okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is a fancy microphone here that hopefully does the trick. So any other comments from anyone in terms of how things are going? Rhiannon, how's it work for you being that far away?
Oh, it's pretty good. I find the videos to be really interactive, and it's nice that I can kind of do them on my own time for the most part, which is good because there's a 6-hour time difference. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to make it to things with a specific time. Right now is better because I'm only working part-time at the moment. So that's good. So I was able to make it to this class.
Curiosity, what time is it in this moment?
It's 12:41 right now.
Keener.
Yeah, so it's like the middle of the day.
12:41 in the day. I thought it was at night.
Yeah, it's also it's on Thursday right now. Yeah.
Any other comments from anyone in terms of how it's going? And just you know, I can step out of the room if you like, but it's just to get that sense. My sense is it's going fine. I'm amazed at how few emails I'm getting from people, which tells me the instructions must be reasonably clear, or people wouldn't be shy. I would hope to send me an email if that were the case, but to feed that back to others. Paul, remind me where you're at.
I'm up in Kenora.
Okay, so it's working okay for you?
Yep, works great.
Okay, well, there's nothing further on that. Anything else?
I think it's a really good balance of rural planning and public health because we're pretty well split, and I think that you've done a good job of bringing both lenses to the issues.
Again, it's something I was conscious that would hopefully work because I believe both professions can benefit from learning more about each other. So thank you for that. I will ask any questions then with regard to any of the assignments, and I suppose right now you're working on the walkability audit. How many people have been able to work in teams? Because of course I encourage you to work with one other person. So how many people are, including people on the screen, if you're working independently, and I realize if you're at a distance, that's almost certainly the case, but it looks like most people are working independently on it. That works out okay. The reason for having people work jointly is I think you learn, like feedback off of each other, but I'm not sure that the workload is necessarily any less if you're working independently than, of course, the two of you working together. I know you work together in other things, but hopefully that makes it. So how is that assignment going? And by the way, I'm sure people are appreciative of my glasses. If you haven't noticed that, I'm missing an arm, and for a fact they can't afford 2 glasses. No, I just picked them up. They were sitting down, picked them up, and the arm caught my computer and it snapped on. So there's replacements ordered, and Selena will appreciate this. The replacement is up in Godridge at the optometrist there.
Oh no. Well, if you need someone to bring it down, I can do that because I'm here every Tuesday. So.
So anyway, that's my glasses issue. But any questions unrelated to the walkability audit in terms of how you proceed?
We found it pretty fun.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. I'm just finding that like it's so easy to get carried away on it and just like write for days on like an issue. I don't know, like there isn't a page count, is there?
I don't. That one might not have a page count. It's 10 issues, and the suggestion is a picture that captures something that you've identified as a positive or a negative. And then I think the most part it was expected that then there would be a paragraph or so under that picture that captures what it was.
And that's what we have now, but it was just,
yeah, then we have the chart that you presented from the example of different elements that you score in like our appendix.
So now I have this vision of a little tiny picture like this, right? And then all
no, we definitely made sure that it's like a paragraph.
Is this the template?
It's in week 3 or something like that.
It's like a chart.
Yeah, that's right.
And are we supposed to put that in the assignment?
You can, it's not, the key thing is for that to serve as a trigger for what you notice that's positive or negative. But having said that, I can't remember exactly what I said, attaching it as an appendix, I think would be fine. With scribbles or up notes on it. Any questions from anyone on screen with regard to the walkability audit assignment? Okay, for the walkability. Okay, anybody else? An issue, he was mentioning an issue with the link.
To what? These optional readings, you may find a discussion walkability starting at page 56 to be helpful for assignment 2.
Oh
yeah, there's something there.
Oh yeah, I heard. Yeah. I'm sure Ken will decide. If I can, I can just upload it.
That's great, thanks.
It's week 2,
Week 3.
Thank you.
Any other questions related to the walkability assignment? Okay, if not, then we'll move along to then look at assignment 3, which is the more detailed active transportation work, and I think it's worth 30%. And there are 3 components to that. And again, people are encouraged to work, I think I've indicated, in teams of 3 to 4, I think. How many people anticipate working in teams in that? So that's great. If you can, I think it's desirable because again, it's a feeding of information back and forth. Again, realizing people on screen. And I had a question from someone about what does it mean if I end up doing this individually? And I haven't really thought that through yet, but we'll talk about that and collect to perspective on it. So the 3 pieces, as I recall, the first is to look at some active transportation plans. There's lots online, and select one of them, and then do a bit of a reflection on that. And I think again, there's this word count that'll be problematic, but I think it's a good exercise to do because the template I provided through this document to get a move on is pretty brief. Like if you're doing a 400-page, probably not the document that you want to use, but I think it can get you into the materials adequately. But it is to have a look at active transportation plans that are out there. So has anybody got to the point of actually looking at sample active transportation plans? Leah, you're nodding. Yes, just want to share a little bit what you found?
Yeah, I found one on a rural town in Nova Scotia on Lunenburg. And it was kind of interesting because they're posing the problems of it first, and it's really that you can't really put a lot of kilometers of sidewalk in on a rural road because there's just not enough pedestrian traffic. But then there's the benefit of it's beautiful and it's a good tourist attraction. And so if you can figure out where tourists want to go, then that's just beneficial for the community and helps to bring money into the town too. So it kind of presented that neat dichotomy.
Okay, rough idea of length and organization?
It's a 20-year plan.
Oh, okay.
And I thought they kind of gave some suggestions. They gave a lot of like a list of who to contact, and they had all these diagrams of how to share the roads. So, if it's over 60 kilometers an hour speed limit, they need to have a bike lane, otherwise you can get by it. But I didn't really think they did a good job of actually laying out, here's what's going to happen. There wasn't a timeline of year 1 do this, because I guess they understood that priorities are going to change and funding changes, but I thought they could have done a better job. It was a long document.
Yeah.
So I think that, I left it and they just said, this is a 20-year plan, but I still had no idea. I think it was published in 2012, 2014. So I don't know where it would be at right now. Yeah.
That's a good example. And the real challenge is to know when you look at something of that nature is to, what can you learn from it, right? In terms of how much time and energy went into it, what kind of resources were consuming of it, and so on. Anyone else look at one just out of curiosity, just to get us thinking a little bit about it?
I found a plan for Walkerton that was more just was like a general strategic plan for the town, and they mentioned a bunch of stuff on active transportation. Living there, I see no actual effort to make those things happen. I kind of came across, it's like a buzzword almost for people to kind of say, oh yeah, no, we got to consider active transportation. Maybe that's not the case everywhere, but in my town it is.
Well, the intent with that piece is to get us looking at other documents, right? Because we can learn much, I think, by simply seeing how other people have done it and the kinds of content they put into it, recognizing that some are going to be really lengthy and some are going to be much shorter than that. And again, we learn from those different experiences. So that's the first piece. The second piece of that assignment is to, as I recall, is to create a strategy for how you actually go about doing an active transportation plan in isolation of doing it. I think I probably have a word count or page limit on that too. I'm thinking I have
3 to 5 pages.
3 to 5 pages in it. And this document will hopefully be of some benefit, but it would be to look at things that who do we get involved with the active transportation plan. I did one up in Kern, and we had the cyclists there, and we had, you know, the fringe naturalists and so on and so forth. And it's who should be at the table, how do we engage them? And then there's a whole series of questions I think you're prompted with in terms of looking at that. Because for many of you, as you step into your career, if you become involved in active transportation planning, it's highly probable you'll have to figure out what the process looks like. And that's a key component of what we've looked to as well. And then the third piece, which is going to be challenging, is to try to create, I'm going to put in quotation marks, I'm not sure what the words are that I use online, but a mini active transportation plan or a semblance of what would be included in a plan, recognizing that you don't have the time nor the resources to do the detailed design work that one might expect to find. But you still have the ability to think back of doing the walkability audit you may have done in this community or elsewhere. Think, well, what are the things that would strike me that need to be included within an active transportation plan? And that's where your samples might be helpful. Key thing there is to make sure that you constrain it to a reasonable amount of space, that you're not doing, well, I shouldn't say that. You might look at an entire community like Lunenburg, and if you did that, then you really have to pull your horns in, if I could say that, in terms of how far can I go, how much detail I can get into. Whereas in another case, you might look at a city block or a town block, in which case then you can be a lot more specific about some of the specific things that you would think would be included.
Would you rather us stick within the page limit than go, like if we did a really good job going 1,000 words, like 1,000 pages, obviously we're not going to do that. But if we did a really good job, or would you rather us just to do the sticking to the short?
It's a good question. Let me say that my expectations are that no one would do more than what's asked.
But you're not going to stop.
But yeah, it's an interesting question. So if I say you can go longer, then does that make everybody feel that you have to go longer?
No.
I like the way you think, Matt. So I think I'm fine then with that. I just don't want, if you say that you're really into it and you want to.
Let's say if we wanted to do one for like an area that doesn't have one yet, and then send that to them, potentially, we could do that.
Then what I would say is yes, absolutely, you can do that. And you might want to talk to me even about your final assignment then. Okay. If somebody said to me, we're going to do an active transportation plan in a full bore on way, then I would entertain a discussion related to what does your final paper need to look like in that context. So that's a fair way of putting it out there. And I don't think of putting it like that in the course outline, but if someone said I'm willing, another way of putting it is that you are prepared to put all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Which is to say, you see where I'm going with that. Good question. And good initiative too. Anyone else? Any questions in that? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I have no idea what that assignment's about, and sort of 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm reasonably comfortable with what I'm being asked to do. How many are in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range? And online, okay. And your name, sorry,
Spencer.
Spencer. So Spencer, how's that?
I'm sitting at probably 5 or 6.
5 or 6, okay.
If I've got more questions for you, I'll just email you.
Absolutely. And likewise, so the question that had been posed to me, what does it mean if I'm doing this on my own without the benefit of being in a group of 2 or 3 other people? And to be honest, I've not really thought that through. In some ways, the question is, I guess, is it a fair assignment for one person to do on their own, as it kind of is laid out there? Because a group of 2 or 3 people does take extra time and energy to come together and meet and coordinate and things of that nature. But what I would say is I would be a little bit, I think you still almost need to do the 3 components of it. If you were doing it individually, it would be hard not to, because I think there's always a benefit from looking at what other people are doing. But I think, is the write-up for that 750 words?
Yeah.
So, you know, the write-up in my view could be a little bit less there. I don't know how much that helps, but of course, Kelsey, this is still not enough space.
Oh, no, it will be.
But we could say 500 words there if you're doing it in your own, just to give a little bit of space there, or acknowledge that you're doing it individually. In terms of doing the process, if you can do it a little bit shorter, that's fine too. But still, that process, I think you need to go through that stage. And likewise, the active transportation plan. Again, people can feel comfortable pulling it in a little bit, but that doesn't in any way speak to the need to have really good quality. Spencer?
I was just going to ask about the 15 to 20 page length for the last part. On your own, that's probably like with the timeline that's left, because that only gives what, 2 weeks to get that done?
Can't remember.
Because it's week 8, and we're into week 4 now, so 4 weeks to get it done. It's going to be a lot with other classes. I don't know what everybody else has, but I've got 2 other classes that have similar workloads.
My comment there, two things. If you can, you'll find that 10 to 15 pages fills up really fast. That would be my concern. In fact, it's probably not enough space, but encourage people to try to do so. But a couple of things, like I would expect people are probably putting pictures into it. I would expect there could be sketches or diagrams, there could be maps, so you can see how quickly like you'd use up the space. But certainly if you're doing it individually, if it helped for me to say 10 to 12 pages, I'm fine with that. The key thing is, what I really want to see is evidence that people have comprehended the concepts of what would be found in an active transportation plan, and able to make it fit in that context. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Online, any questions from anyone? So I have to remember what I committed to here. That was sort of 500 words for the phase 1, if you're doing it individually. And I mean, truly, even 10 to 12 pages, it might, if you can do it in less than that, and the quality's there, I'm okay with that too. But I think you'll find that once you get into it, the space will fill up really fast. So any other questions on that assignment or the final 2 assignments? Yeah.
I'm wondering about references. Some stuff if you know the community, then you know you have that community mindset, but do you have to find all these references to back up everything that you're saying about the community?
In terms of the active transportation plan, my general response to that would probably be no, within reason. And so, for example, there's stuff that you're going to want to reference and stuff that you might not need to reference. And so the example, to me, the kinds of, as follows: from personal experience, or in speaking to, personal experience, it's evident that getting from the downtown of Goderich out to the Zare store is fraught with danger, right? Is that fair, Selena?
Absolutely.
Yeah, where would you reference that, or where would you find a reference for that? So for me, as if you were writing a professional report, some of it is based on knowledge and based on even I say intuition, and you judge accordingly. Conversely, if you said that it's evident that 73% of the accidents that happen in the in the city of Guelph are caused by people who don't pay attention to traffic signs. Well, pretty nice bit of information to make up, but I would look for a specific reference in that context. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, it's not intended as an academic piece, although in the little piece at the end, which is I think there's space for a bit of reflection. Am I saying that right? At the end of the active transportation plan? Am I remembering that right?
I don't think so.
No, that would have been a good idea.
I don't see that there.
Well, if you were doing reflection, you can see where it would be maybe helpful in that, because that's a chance, actually wouldn't have been a bad idea, to step back from it all and say what worked, what didn't work, and given that I didn't ask for it, I won't change my mind. Any other question? Any questions on the final two assignments? Again, I'll just go over it quickly, and I've done it in the videos. But the fourth assignment is a fairly short reflection, looking at the final. There's 4 weeks of the course to which there's no other assignments connected. So it's really just providing people with the encouragement to make sure you take the time to look at the videos and so on. And we try to pare that back a little bit at that stage as well, and the readings as well. And then the final item is a paper on a topic of your interest connected to the 13 actions in Healthy Rural Communities Action Kit. Okay. If we don't have any more questions, I'll keep this moving along. Yeah. Spencer?
Assignment 4, that's one 750-word piece for all 4 weeks, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And it provides you with some flexibility. Again, I can't remember exactly how I worded it in the outline, but that provides you the direction that's there. Okay. What I was hopeful we would do was a remaining time, and if I suspect if you finish earlier rather than later, people are okay with that. We'll do things more formally in the other 2 weeks that we come together in person. But tonight it was just a bit of a chance to reflect on your first assignment in terms of whether you found your community to be healthy. I think I posed 3 questions on the website. What did you learn about your selected community? Is it healthy? How walkable was your selected community? And there's one video to be watched. Those are really the 2 questions there. How many people have done some of the walkability audit already? So for those of you who have, maybe you can share some of your results that other people will be interested in learning about. And but it's also a chance to reflect on the healthy communities piece that you just completed. So does anybody want to volunteer what community you looked at, Spencer?
So I'm looking at the town of Georgina, more specifically Keswick, because the town of Georgina is an amalgamation of like 4 smaller towns. So that's what I'm doing it on. And I'm just doing it around like the block where I live, because there's quite a few different changes that the area has gone through. So like Keswick used to be a cottage town, which in my first paper I wrote partially about that. And so like some of the old streets have some of the still ancient cottages that have been redone so you can live in them all year round. And then some of them have had those torn down and built new. And then there's areas where a builder's come in and built an entire section of a street. And therefore the town said, okay, we need sidewalks there. Well, there's only sidewalks down like that one piece of the street. And then you get down into old cottage streets where there's no sidewalks and the ditches are right on the side of the road and they're 4 or 5 feet deep. And like you get into all these different things. And so from the walkability standpoint, and then like a lot of stuff's really spread out. And so without sidewalks, the road speed limits are all 40 kilometers an hour, but nobody does that. They're usually doing 50 or 60. So walking down like Lake Drive along the lake, for example, you're walking down a street where the speed limit's 40 and people are doing 60. And so cars are just zipping right by you right there. And then the town also doesn't really plow sidewalks very well. So there's that. And so like the winter brings a whole new challenge with walkability of the neighborhood. So all that kind of stuff is really big in the community here. So the 10 pictures I've got, I haven't taken all 10 yet, but for the most part, they're I'd probably say about maybe a 1.5 kilometer square area of the community, because there's a catwalk that crosses from one street to the other so you can get to a park, but they don't plow it in the winter, and they've got those steel pylons on the end so you can't run snowmobiles down it. And it also means they can't run the little sidewalk plow down it. So the longer the winter goes, the more eventually the posts aren't really a big deal for the snowmobile, because you just get the skis up and the track fits between the posts. And once the snow's built up enough from the plow pouring snow on top, you just go over the posts and you run the snowmobile down the walkway anyways.
So it becomes a snowmobile trail, which was the intent, and it's no longer walkable.
Yeah.
Because they can't plow.
It just gets worse and worse as the winter goes, to the point that it'll have, the rest of the neighborhood will have like a foot of snow in the front yards, 1.5 feet, and this thing's piled up almost to the same height as the chain link fence on both sides of it. So it's just one of those things that town doesn't really seem to care too much about, making sure that the walkable areas are still walkable in the winter. So this is actually kind of a cool assignment to do in the winter just because of the snow bringing a different aspect to it.
Yeah, it really is quite different. Winter, and if you think of different age groups and categories of people too. I was also quite interested in your comment about the sidewalk being here. Municipality required it, but it's not elsewhere, which is
yeah, because the houses are old and they never required it way back when.
Someone else to volunteer? Yep.
We did it here in Guelph, Kelsey and I, and we did it on the neighborhood of Carden Street and Macdonell, where the City Hall is. And that neighborhood kind of offered a nice perspective because one street was recently redone, which is Carden Street in front of City Hall. So that has a couple more of our successes. And then the Macdonell and then the big Basilica church. It's where we found a little more of our failures, I guess, of old infrastructure.
Yeah, and not so like updated sidewalks. We found with like safety precautions.
Yeah. One thing, so we started at the train station, walked up Carden, then crossed with Wilson over Macdonell at their neck. They now added in that little viewing center between the two lines, because a lot of people, I guess, were stopping on Macdonell in the middle of the street to take photos of the church. So and they were crossing there anyway, so this kind of offers a relief station. And they have signs saying pedestrians watch out, which is nice, and then it offers a little area where you can take a photo in safety. And then we walked up to the church down Macdonell and then back over. So at the train station, we found their ramp. The first section where it was really steep had a railing, but then while it got shallower, the railing just stopped. It just was no longer there. So we found that to be maybe an issue if someone needed a hand rail. And then it offered people to jump over it, which is a tripping hazard. And then at the church, there was no ramp. So people, if they wanted to head to the church, they had to walk all the way down and then up the sidewalk. But obviously, when it was built, they wouldn't have built it in the ramp there. And a lot of the sidewalk on Macdonell, there was little holes and off-centered areas. But then on Carden Street, they had, I forget what that's called. Yeah. But between where the road is and the sidewalk, they have little circles so that you can feel, if you're seeing impairments and stuff, that the sidewalk stops there. So that was nice. And they have little lights along for visualization.
I'm trying to find the word for those little dots. They're truncated domes.
Okay.
Is that what?
Could be.
I Googled it, but I mean.
The little bubble things that warn you if.
Yeah, and you often find them at where you cross the street. So now they're sometimes yellow lines or something. So we saw at some older corners that it was just the concrete had some bricks, but then there was this one intersection where maybe it was from it was the one desk worth of a ramp down onto the road, but only the very middle had the line, so you wouldn't know unless you were standing right in the middle, like if you had a seeing impairment or something. So. Yeah, we just did a small little area, but we found a lot of little things along the way.
Yeah, great content. You can see how that would easily fit into the active transportation plan too, right? In terms of the suggestions.
Oh, sorry. One thing I want to say too that we thought was cool was there's a lot of infographics around the square, a mapping,
wayfinding.
Okay.
Yeah, wayfinding, and there's also something that was cool. New trees that were planted on the sidewalks. There's a nice little sign please don't park your bike here.
And still growing.
And still growing. And then it's there's a link for people who are curious about more, I don't know, about the trees or online. So it was
and in front of one of the businesses, the tree actually had little bird feeders on it too. So I know with one project I kind of did before that, but bird watching helps people with Alzheimer's and stuff remember about stuff from their when they're younger and stuff. So it's a nice little thing for all ages.
It's interesting as you were chatting, I was thinking about Bayfield for a second. Anybody been to the little village of Bayfield in Huron? Bayfield is a wonderful little tourist community, probably 700-800 people in the winter, and probably several thousand in the summer. And the sidewalks don't exist. It's a gravel pathway. And it's interesting because on one hand, you sacrifice accessibility and you sacrifice that function. But in that process, you create this wonderful tree-lined set of streets that just feels really cool. So it's really interesting give and take between, in that instance, between the visual amenity and the attractivity of the community versus the safety that might be associated with the sidewalks. Just interesting little side tidbit. Somebody else, maybe somebody online want to share either anything you've done around walkability or the community you looked at?
I'm looking at the city of Stratford, particularly in the West End. And I'm doing a really interesting neighborhood because there's a lot of different functions throughout the neighborhood. So there's schools, there's recreation areas, there's grocery stores, pharmacies, a lot of really interesting uses. And this particular area I found really interesting because back 20 years ago, it looked a lot different than it did now. The high schools were sort of like the edge of the city, and then there was some rural roads that were sort of the characteristic boundary of the city. But in the past couple decades or so, there's been a lot of development, and the boundary of the city has definitely expanded west. And just doing my audit and looking at the different sidewalks and the different like pedestrian friendly areas, you can definitely see that lack of uniformity that exists when different phases of development go on in the same place. Like the sidewalks definitely abruptly end in an area that probably 20 years ago, not many people were walking around, but now very visually clearly needs a safe place for people to be walking. So that was a really interesting observation I made. I mean, I've lived in the area for my whole life and it wasn't really something I thought about, but going on that walking tour made me realize some of those discrepancies that are very much visible now. So yeah, it's good.
Interesting you bring a lens to something, isn't it? When you force yourself to think through how it's seen or how other people might.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you for that. Anyone else? Either, again, anything you've done so far with walkability or your first assignment?
I did simulated walking from my house to the grocery store. I took my family so that they could be models in my photos. I just walked behind them and took pictures.
How old are your children now, Matt?
My oldest daughter's 7,
okay.
So she got to walk herself, and the youngest is 6 months. So my wife had her in like a front carrier thing. We didn't take the stroller because right off the bat, we know it's not walkable enough to bring a stroller. So we have I wanted to simulate this walk because one, walking to a grocery store is kind of an active transportation thing you want to encourage, right? Which we never do because it's not very walkable. And the route we took, it's a bit of a loop, but you got to double back at one point, and then you can take an alternate loop on the way home. So we kind of did both. But the one section of it, to start with, we actually have to take to the bus every morning. Even though the bus drives by our house, we have to backtrack to the stop. And our road is historically the edge of town that my neighbor tells me until like the 60s had no houses except a couple farmhouses. So I believe all the sidewalks in town were built before then. I don't think they put a single one in since then. So I've got no sidewalks still. And we're right on a bend, it's pretty narrow. So walking there is terrible in the summertime alone. And then in the winter, everything tightens up and people can't see around the bend. And it's just a terrible corner. I've got the picture here. You guys can't see. It's real close. It's a bit dark, but that's us, them on the left side. There's another couple on the other side, and then a car driving right up the middle of the road to not hit people. But they can't even see cars coming from behind them, right? This is a dangerous corner. And then finally hit a sidewalk, and they actually do plow them, which is it's pretty decent, but there's no salt. So if you've got a wheelchair or a stroller, you still can't use them. And then you get a whole bunch of weird intersections. This first one you hit because there's no sidewalk and the road meets on an angle like this. People turn right mostly, and we'd be coming from the right, and there's no sidewalk to tell you, like a sidewalk kind of tells people stop before the sidewalk, right? So they'll creep way up because they can't see left very well. And then there's a car in front of you when you're trying to cross the street, right? And they don't really respect the pedestrian as they're turning there. And then there's sidewalks. Everywhere had only one side of the road. Although I did get the data set from the town, and the main street has two sidewalks apparently, which you couldn't tell from the walk because they only blow the one half in the winter. There's a one pretty bad spot before the grocery store where there's a gas station, a garage, a subway, and whatever all next to each other, a commercial strip that has one boulevard about the size of this table, and then about 150 meters of just the parking lot and the sidewalk are merged. So there's no restriction of where a car can come in and out, right? So it's almost like for 150 meters, you're crossing the street. It's even worse than crossing the road because there's no designated spot for cars to come in and out. So that's all pretty bad. And then there's like, you go by the hospital and the sidewalk's on the wrong side of the road, and you have to pay for parking at the hospital. So it actually be like, I've walked there from my house and it's pretty far, but there's no crosswalk or anything. And then there's a long-term care facility right next to the hospital. Same deal, no crosswalk, the sidewalk's on the wrong side of the road. And my wife works as a physiotherapy assistant for a long-term care facility. She says for the people who can walk, it's like they encourage you to go out and walk into town and stuff, right? But they're not that mobile to run across the street without a sidewalk. So that was a bit of a failure I noticed too. But the sidewalks being plowed was a success in my mind for the most part. But yeah, there's a real deficit of sidewalks in a lot of spots and some bad intersection with bad angles and no stop signs in certain directions where there should be some.
You mentioned the absence of sidewalks. So why do you think there's a resistance from the municipality to have sidewalks?
So I read their asset management plan the other day. And to me, it's total finances. So I believe, and I could be wrong here, but I think in the 50s, there's a bunch of provincial spending on just roads everywhere in the province, right? So the initial spend on the asset to get it there was done by the upper level with the money. And then now everything's devolved to the municipality to maintain it. They're already limited on funds to maintain the roads, right? They don't have the funding to provision for in a small community. Well, Brockton's the township, right? So they've got all these rural roads they've got to maintain too. I don't think they just have the money. Plus, I don't know if that many people have complained. I think there hasn't been a lot of people with kids or anything on this road to really bother anyone to put in a sidewalk. And so the asset management plan even showed how they're kind of like, they're even at a deficit for a 20-year plan. Even if you raise taxes by 2% a year and chop this much off a year, blah, 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 you're still going to need some more money from like project funding from the provincial government or something. So that'll be my guess. I haven't asked anyone yet.
And the maintenance and the liability that they would perceive to be an issue perhaps too, even notwithstanding there's some snow plowing going on inside.
The other issue here is, if you guys can see, there's a pole there. That's an old Bell telephone pole. I don't think it's hydro. You can't tell because the snow's there, but probably from the mic to here is the distance between the edge of the road to the pole, sometimes maybe even a bit closer. You wouldn't actually be able to fit a standard sidewalk between the road and the pole unless you narrowed the road or moved the pole. Narrowing the road's a bit of a no-go because it's already narrow, and moving a pole is expensive, right? So that's another set of problems that comes into play.
Great comments, and the kind of things that we can reflect upon as well as we move into the active transportation plan in terms of how feasible an action might be and the lens that we bring to that. Notwithstanding, it may still be a good thing to do, but how do you make it happen? So thanks for that. Someone else want to share again on either work you've done so far in terms of your walkability audit, or whether your community was a healthy community in your view?
I've been doing mine on downtown Harrison, and kind of the interesting thing there is, and maybe you know, Wayne, because I know you're a little bit familiar with Harrison, but the topography of downtown Harrison, it's much higher at the lights, and then as it enters downtown, it comes down a big hill, and it actually gives the perception that the traffic's going a lot faster than what it is. And I used to work for the town, and we used to hear that a lot, that was a big issue there. So that's interesting that then there were a lot of studies done that actually the traffic is obeying traffic laws, but it gives this sense of insecurity from a pedestrian standpoint that the traffic's going very fast. The other issue is all of the infrastructure is very old, and when it was designed, there there's the main set of lights, and then there's the downtown, and then there isn't really another place for pedestrians to cross for a significant amount of time, like a significant distance. I don't know what the actual measurement would be, but that's interesting too, because there's also parking on each side of the road. So my dad calls it the town of jaywalkers, because it's literally just people dodging in and out between cars through downtown. And there also isn't a bypass around Hairston, and in the summer, it's the prime route to get to the beach for all of the travelers. So oftentimes the traffic is lined up from one end of Hairston to the other, and people are literally dodging between traffic that's just sitting parked at the light. So again, it's interesting due to the seasonality, because right now it's not maybe as bad. However, we have snowbanks coming into play, but we also don't have that seasonal traffic coming into play either. So yeah.
I think for rural communities, the snowbanks are a really interesting one to mention, because, you know, some of the small communities I'm familiar with, it's not unusual to have a, you know, 4 or 5 foot snowbank alongside the road. The snow doesn't, it may get removed weekly or periodically, but people still contend with it. And as you say, do lots of nasty things in terms of crossing where they shouldn't. And particularly, I'm thinking in the summer, you probably have drivers coming, you know, the local people might be familiar with people crossing the street in unexpected places, but traffic coming through to the beach might not be. So So somebody else want to volunteer to share your experience, your thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
I am doing the village of Cobden near my home village. It's about an hour and a half west of Ottawa. Again, I'm finding the snowbanks are a particular challenge, especially in the Ottawa area. We get much more snow than down here. So sometimes the snowbanks they seem like 10 feet tall sometimes, because you'll be looking at them, and you know, I'm 5'8" and you're still looking up at them. And there's sort of on the main street, there's the street which is decently wide. There's a lot of tractors and farm machinery that will go through it, so they've accommodated for that. And then they have this area for cars and trucks to park, and then that's what becomes the snow storage area for the main street. Okay, although I am seeing we're starting to notice that it seems to be the people who own businesses and own houses that front on the street that shovel shoving onto the sidewalk and clears a little bit of sidewalk sort of in that area, rather than actually being a city or a village township group going through and actually clearing the sidewalks or having a sidewalk clearer. I was actually surprised by whenever I was sort of looking at it from a summer perspective or a no snow perspective, that it does seem to actually be quite a walkable community if you look at the village itself, but it's surrounded by farms and rural areas, which whenever you take that into account makes it quite not a active transport community. There's an elementary school in town or in the village that has a huge catchment area. Probably about 20% of the kids are from within the village and they walk to school, but the other 80% of the kids might be on a bus for 20 minutes, half an hour. My brother's on a bus for 45 minutes to get into the village to go to school. So if you're actually in the village, it serves you quite well. But for everybody else who uses the village, active transit is a rural classic issue. It's just really not possible. Some of the residential streets don't have sidewalks at all. Main Street and the street to the school and the street the school is on have sidewalks. And then Highway 17, which is sort of the main thoroughfare of Renfrew County, runs. So the village is sort of here, and then the Highway 17 sort of runs here, and it's maybe a couple 100 meters, and they have a sidewalk on one side of the highway, but not on the other. And sometimes you'll see people just sprint across the highway to get to the chip pit or the gas station or something like that. So in the summer, we triple roughly in population with cottagers and whitewater rafters and stuff who come to the Ottawa River. So we run around 800 normally, and then people coming through in the summer. So if you're people, there's a whole bunch of like pedestrian like signs, temporary signs will go up in the summer, be like look out for jaywalkers and stuff like that. But I don't know how much good it actually is. It's an interesting community because it has good aspects. It has more services than I would have expected for a village that size, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be appropriate for the full-time residents of the community.
I think you said 800 people in the top 10. It speaks to the level of services to be provided.
Yeah. And I'm saying the majority of the people who are using active transportation as their regular means are either children, elementary school age children, or older people. Most people probably between the ages of 60 to 70 drive.
Thoughts
I was going to add in a couple things. So I did Petone, which is an area kind of near Wellington, and it's a historical area that has like a little high street to it. And it's gone through a lot of improvements in the last several years. So they've added like angled parking on the high street and like street trees to try and slow down traffic. So they have made a lot of improvements. But that being said, in New Zealand, people are a bit obsessed with roundabouts. And they definitely have their place, but on high streets, not necessarily. Because pedestrians are forced to walk around them and then feel like they aren't a priority. And then they can also be a little bit unsafe for pedestrians and cyclists. And then besides that, there's also this kind of interesting thing. We just brought in e-scooters, so like Lime e-scooters. And there's lots of issues with them blocking off the sidewalks. And then also people can go at like over 22 kilometers an hour on them, and they often ride on the sidewalks. So that makes you feel really unsafe. I've almost been hit by a couple of them already. And they're a good thing. They're a really good thing, but I think more thought needs to go into regulating them and figuring out like areas that they can go versus not, because like the high street that I'm looking at is quite a historic area with pavements or sidewalks that probably are a little bit too narrow. So just trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Right. would you say the attitude in New Zealand towards active transportation, is it any different than your experience in Canada?
I would say that it depends on where you go. Auckland isn't very good when it comes to active transportation. Wellington is very good in comparison. It's considered like the most walkable city in New Zealand, and I think they have a better attitude towards it all. They expect you to walk and bus to most places. Where Auckland, you're kind of expected to drive. And so they're in the city center, it has like a big highway going in the middle of it that kind of stops people from feeling like they're safe when they're walking around. But I think because I worked in Scotland before working here, and I think Scotland was definitely the best. They have like specific transportation planners that look at transportation systems as a whole. And like they're specifically focused on making sure things are more walkable. And that there's like good cycle routes and things like that. So they'll take a look at like almost every major application that comes into council and check it for like safe routes to schools and all sorts of other aspects, just to make sure that every little increment is improving active transportation.
I'm going to ask just one follow-up question, an administrative perspective. We have folks here in public health and folks in planning. So in Scotland, we're active transportation planners within planning departments or in public health in some fashion, or is it a mixture?
The NHS didn't really, they were just starting to kind of engage with planning as a whole. It was really interesting. It was kind of a little bit separate at the time, but I think they're working on integrating things a little bit more. So they've created a bunch of planning tools for planner sheets in Scotland, which I found quite interesting. And a lot of it was about assessing place, which included a component and health together. And part of it had to do with like, do you feel safe within a walking around or cycling in this area? But in general, I think it was a little bit separate at the time. And NHS were kind of dealing with their own things, which is the health service in Scotland and the UK.
Thank you for that insight. Someone else? So, two or three people, perhaps?
Okay, yeah. For my walkability audit, I did my walk to school, which is kind of fun. And I found my neighborhood was fun. It was neat to see it, like the walkability checklist in mind of trees and a wide sidewalk. But I found the worst part of the walk was on campus, which I thought was interesting. I think it's a pretty good campus, but then sidewalks don't extend. Like if you go out to the athletic center, you don't go through the parking lot to Stone Road. So, and it's really interesting doing it in winter, because I can see that I'm not the only one that's just like cutting cross country. You can see they have a footprint. Really, what I think should be happening is if you're looking at those kind of like footprints in the snow and say we need a walkway here because it's being. I mean, in some places I am just taking a shortcut. In other places, there's really no better way to go because there are. That's kind of fun.
It's interesting to look at the campus. And to confirm, it's not, because I know there's some construction that caused foot traffic too much. This is not that
like
at all.
You can see the sidewalk end, and then across the street, and you can see the footprints going up the sidewalk. I don't know where they expect us to go. And there's another one, if you're walking Stone Road, before you get to the bus loop, you can see several tracks. You know, I guess in that instance, you can't go to the bus loop. Why would you? Because if there is a shortcut, I'm going to take it.
And they did do that. They saw the mud pit.
Yeah, but now it's just a gravel mud pit.
Yeah,
It's
pretty gross.
definitely better. It was like you'd have footprints this deep, and people would just be tossing it everywhere. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yes, it's the end of course.
looked at a town called Lincoln. And I ended up choosing that over as well, because you could use your home, because you use one example of a definition for rural in one of the college where there's no Walmart. That resided with me because my boss there once said there was no place to buy underwear or socks in Lincoln. So I was like, well, that's kind of frustrating, because those are things like hygienically you need. But then I looked at like their healthcare there. I was in Lincoln, so there's 25,000 year-round plus migrant workers. And then there's 5 kind of urban centers in the hamlet, and only in the major urban center is there 2 doctor's offices, and most of those doctor's offices don't have walk-in. Our walk-in clinics for anyone, like, you have to be a person. So if you want to go to a walk-in clinic at like a Walmart, or if you want to go to a hospital, you have to go out. So healthcare section health, that was hard. That was some issues there. For education, I found that so in my lab, we have 2 staff who are dedicated to work on they travel for schools for children with the public health. So they found that there's one elementary school in Lincoln that they could actually work on finding a way to walk to the school safely. No, there's only one school in this town, bicycle lanes on one street. So that's good for that one school, but the other schools are kind of suffer from it. And their high school is in the main urban center, but now the Niagara region is having a super school, so that one's shutting down, and that's going to Guernsey. So those kids from families who could walk before most likely won't be able to walk anymore. And then I also wrote about how they have a shortage of industrial and employment land. So most of the places where people work are scattered throughout the Greenbelt. So it's hard for people to get to work. So the employment health center, that's a big issue for people to work. So the town has recently done a pilot transit project that I helped them with, but they only have so much money. So to get them the bus to run when the shift works needed, it's not kind of feasible at the current state. And I used to go from St. Catharines to Lincoln. So I would see this one person who was at a greenhouse who would take the bus with me into the town. And once you got to town, you take this bike off to go bus, and I have to bike another like 15 kilometers, and he'd be even moving out in the winter time. So it's struggle for like employment that way. So those are I found that. So they are doing things to get better, but they do struggle.
Snow doesn't help.
No, the rain doesn't help either. Once when I was biking, I took the second about halfway, and then it just started downpouring, and I didn't expect for that, and I was like, because there's no cabs. So it's kind of like I just pulled off and just like let the rain pound out, and then keep going. But the weather is hard, and that's effectively, the cab. So there's a cab service in Guernsey, the next town over. But for the cab to come into Lincoln, you have to pay. So the town of Lincoln, they do have an active transportation committee that I've been a part of, and it is nice to see that they have someone with an accessibility issue, so they're in a wheelchair. So she's a part of it. So she had the cab come, but it was so much money. It would be like, I don't know, like $40 one way, one trip for her, but she had no other way. She liked the bus.
Thanks for those. Sorry that you got wet. Okay. Yeah. No, but it's true though. How do I mean, because encouraging folks to cycle and walk for that matter too, it's sometimes much more than simply providing navigate through those kinds of issues.
Yeah.
what they might
Yeah,
do
and
as well.
so like where the GO bus went into Lincoln was a kilometer from where the office was, which the town office was also hard for no citizens realistically could walk to the office, because it's on the outskirts, near the highway. So like you could, but it's not really safe, to walk there. So that's an issue. Like you want to pay your taxes and stuff, you have to have access to a vehicle. Well, now there's online, but some people don't want to do it that way. But it's a self-service road along the highway. So even though people walk along it, they technically don't want to put a sidewalk because they don't want to encourage people to walk along a road that goes 80 kilometers an hour. So like I'd be walking along it and like blowing at me from the cars and have to go off, but on the ground,
Okay.
they'd be on the wheels of the car, so they kind of came up in the air.
Check stuff out.
I tried to talk them and talk them.
So I think what we'll do is there's maybe 2 or 3 more people to hear from if you haven't had a chance to contribute yet, and I suspect we'll end distinctly early, but if that's okay. Really a chance to have this come together. So Yasmin, just for your benefit, we're just going through things, and people can comment on either of the first 2 projects, with the walkability audit or not. So just a few comments from people, and just to see how it's going and what initial impressions might be. So I haven't really kept notes of everyone who's spoken, but I know we've heard from quite a few people. But if you haven't had a chance to say anything yet, curious to hear at least a couple of comments from you. So anybody want to speak yet?
For the first assignment, I did my hometown of Burlington, which is by no means small. It's like 185,000 people, and I think it's growing. But it was interesting to look at it. I'm from the north end of Burlington, which is much more rural than the southern part closest to the lake. So it's kind of a street that runs through, which is Dundas. North of Dundas, you enter the green belt and up into the escarpment. And so I further into the second assignment, growing up in that area, walking's just not something you did because the road is 80 kilometers an hour. There's a gravel shoulder. There's nowhere to go. And so then when I moved to Guelph and suddenly there's sidewalks and I could walk places and it was kind of magical. So it's kind of interesting the dichotomy in the city. But I mean, Burlington being big and fairly wealthy, I think it's a pretty healthy city. But it'll be interesting just to kind of think about the walkability in the southern part versus the northern part and the differences that exist, because if you're coming from North Burlington, everything that you need is in South Burlington, so you're going to be driving there anyway, so you're not going to be walking. If you're driving to the plaza, it's not going to park your car and walk to wherever you need to go, you're just going to drive to all your destinations. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking at the city for sure.
And one thing which I find striking too is you have an area like Burlington, and there's a tendency to think it was urban, yet probably the geography of Burlington in terms of the land area.
Probably, yeah. Just most everybody lives in the south end.
Yeah.
So the density is far greater.
So thank you for that. I see Haseeb, you joined us. I think, yeah, your mic's muted. Can you hear us?
One, where is the community? Put down that we're talking.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks. If you want to click on your camera so we can see you too, that would be, I'll be paranoid about that. It would be great to be able to say hello in person. Well, I guess we're saying hello in person if we can't.
My videos are working for some reason on real.
Anyway, we're just going through just a quick discussion on the first 2 assignments. And if anybody has any comments or reflections, that would be good.
Okay.
So anyone else in this room, did you want anything you want to say?
On the first assignment, I looked at the city of Kingston. I grew up there, like my whole life was born there, and I went to Queens, my undergrad there, and we lived in Queens my life.
Why did you have to go that far?
It's called.
You should have thought about it on this rock.
And growing up, it was just the 2-lane highway through the 2 or 3 neighborhoods that were initially there. Small grocery store, a public school, and a high school, and then that's 6 kilometers from downtown, which is where you go.
You would have said
on the other side, and it's not 6 kilometers, so not that far, but it's not walkable. So growing up, I found it interesting because there was one Catholic elementary school and then a public high school, and I guess you went to Catholic elementary school if you wanted to walk there, which is fine. But the theater school was the high school downtown, so it sounds like you have friends, if you have bus, go to downtown. So walking to school wasn't an option, and getting across town was in the morning as years went on and went through. So right now, a huge issue actually for the town is they've approved setting busing, which has upset a lot of people because they live in the backyard, and there was a lot of opposition towards it for like 7 years, which is what the couple options unfortunately due to like the public and whatnot. So it'll be interesting. I feel like this summer they're gonna start.
That's it, and you do a refresher.
Building it.
That's what these things you have no idea of. You can
But the current bridge is really painful. Going out, there isn't really any kind of like sharing the
Is it a
way.
vehicle bridge?
Yeah, it's a vehicle bridge. There's really kind of like sharing the road. If you bike, like, if people do bike because it's waiting in the Royal Military College, so like there isn't an access area. But this, yeah, a lot of close calls and a lot of instances. Yeah, there's been a lot of changes in the past. Maybe there is happening too, which could be better.
things are just here.
It's interesting with those with infrastructure.
I remember when
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, I think we've heard from everybody in the room here, and I think the only folks we haven't heard from online, I don't think we've heard from you, Jasmine, or Hasib, both in Alberta, I think, if I got that right.
Yeah, the community I'm looking at is in northern Alberta. It's Grand Prairie. It's about 70,000 people, but it fluctuates. The neighborhood I'm looking at, it's kind of interesting because it's an older part of town, but it includes the main downtown strip, which last summer they upgraded all of the water lines going downtown and the sewer lines. So at the same time, they kind of tacked on a huge downtown redevelopment project. So it's been interesting seeing the, that one street that has a lot of what we consider modern, tools for walkability. And then it's surrounded by an area that doesn't. So there's not a lot of linkages to that main street. And in the area surrounding it, there's that thing where you see where you want to go, but you can't quite figure out how to get there. But yeah, I think they have quite a few redevelopment plans adopted for the neighborhood, and they're slowly kind of chipping away one section at a time. So that transition points are something that's interesting, because if you have one street that's walkable, but not a lot of ways to get there, it doesn't actually encourage a lot of walking. So,
Grand Prairie. I'm sorry, it was Grand Prairie that you were at?
yeah, Grand Prairie.
Remind me the population of Grand Prairie?
70,000.
17 or 7?
70. Yeah, and it's surrounded by a really rural area. Like the closest city is Edmonton, which is 4.5 hours away. So there's, a lot of the recreation and the culture, a lot of it tends more to the rural side. For example, for every car that's in the city, there's probably 5 giant trucks. So people appreciate, wide lanes and drive to a lot of places.
Thanks for that. Hasib, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can. So I live in BC. I work for and live in Williams Lake, BC, which is in interior BC. So for some context, it would be 6 hours north of Vancouver. 2.5 hours south from Prince George. So it's a Williams Lake. It's a community of just over 10,000 people. It's the regional center for 40,000 people. So the trade area is about 40,000 people. We do have a lot of similar problems as you can see in many rural communities all across Canada. People do love driving to places. The infrastructure, there's no linkage of sidewalks or a pedestrian trail network or a bike lane that's continuous throughout the city that would bring or that encourage people to be more active in like active transportation wise. The city does have bylaws and various bylaws that support standards that that would encourage developers to put in a bike lane when they do a street or proper sidewalks at least on one side of the street. But what happens in a city like Williams Lake, it's a lot of the times it becomes more about bringing development into town at any cost. When you have that, then people usually get away with just council getting variances. Then council decides we want this development or do this just because we need some sidewalk improvements, right? So we see a lot of those problems. Walkability wise, we are working on some trail networks around the lake and just connecting it to downtown of the city. So I mean, it's getting better slowly. But if you look at our parking and everything, our parking is so onerous that, like any development that goes in, like for a 10-kid daycare, our parking requirement is probably 18, 19 spaces, which is quite onerous. So, like, for various commercial developments, we require a lot of parking. So, our downtown is full of just empty parking lots. And so we, like how our zoning bylaw and the parking regulations are set up, we don't really do much in encouraging active transportation. We encourage more people, just, more car-centric development. And parking, and it's funny, if staff are trying to reduce parking, that's the only time we see a lot of people come into our council meetings and debate that. So parking is always a contentious issue. So it's trying to find that balance. I think that's the struggle Williams Lake has right now.
Which was, if I understood it correctly, it's around the reluctance of our political elected officials to require certain contributions on the part of developers because they're so keen to have the development in many rural communities that they will tend to reduce the requirements or I won't say shirk their responsibility, but they're so desperate to have the investment and the tax revenue that they will sometimes give people a bit of a free ride, if I could put it that way. Am I correct?
Yeah, that'll be correct. That'll be very correct. And a lot of the times, because the flip side of not having those sidewalks or really well lit roads or street network is that our downtown after 5 p.m. basically becomes a ghost town. So we don't see pedestrians at all. And then if you don't have pedestrians at night, then your businesses are not doing well necessarily, right? So that's also another struggle that staff have all the time, with going back and forth with council that you have to get this sidewalks or active some kind of network going on, or a public realm going on in downtown core or at various parts of the city, so that you can have a vibrant community, right? So you can at least have the community feel. And a lot of the times, to a point where I think any council needs to determine at what stage do you use a little bit of force to make people walk. No one likes to walk in winter, but there's a lot of benefits of walking. And once people are walking, they explore the community more. So businesses tend to do well. There's a lot of benefits to that. At one point, it's really about the vision that sometimes the municipality or local government needs to start enforcing. So.
Thank you very much for that, Brianna, nodding in agreement with much of what you were saying around. So I'm guessing those political realities exist in New Zealand just as they do here.
Sorry, yeah, I'm also, I went to school in Prince George, and so Williams, I spent a lot of time in Williams Lake, so yeah.
Well, folks, I think we've had a good discussion. It's a touch before 8. Any questions from anyone or any final observations?
So I've heard a lot of people talking about like the electric bike. Like I heard the electric bike thing, and then like other people were talking about some of the other stuff. The city of Aurelia has problems with electric bikes right now on the they have an entire trail system that they've built that's supposed to be for bicycles and pedestrians, and they're having issues with the electric bikes using the trail system when they're really not supposed to be. But for anybody who's looking at like active transportation plans and wants to see a fairly good one or one that's they're really pushing really heavily, the city of Aurelia has made some pretty good strides with forcing developers to have bicycle parking when they develop plaza. So for example, one of the plazas I looked at over the summer, we were doing pre-consultation work for them so they could get approval for their development. When they sent us the site plan, it didn't have any of their bicycle parking. So we sent it back to them saying, you have to show us where the bicycle parking is going to be on in your parking lot and in front of which buildings and where you're going to put it before we'll approve your commercial development. So a lot of those sorts of things, the city of Aurelia is really working on trying to get some of those things put in and making some changes in the direction of going a little more green. So they've got quite a few green plans and active transportation stuff that they're working on right now.
This brings in the public health side, where you can get, for example, the medical officer or the health unit supportive of those kinds of action. It makes it much easier for the planners to advocate for that kind of work too, and get both parties to work together. Anything from anyone on the screen? Any final words or comments? Okay, anyone hear anything final? Well, hopefully this has been of value to people. I know we're only going to do it 3 times over the course of the semester, but at least we sort of realize we're part of a cohort of people in the class, and we get a chance to hear different perspectives. So I'll thank everybody on the screen for joining us tonight. Thanks again to Sharon for organizing it. On the count of 3, everybody here is going to say goodbye to the people. 1, 2, 3. Bye.